in this book, you've developed a framework for how to fix everything. It's called the ladder. Can you explain it?
Okay, it's not a framework for how to fix everything. I would never say that.
I'll explain it to Tim Urban at some point.
Okay.
How this humor thing works.
Yeah,
no. A framework of how to think about collaboration between humans such that we could fix things.
I think it's a compass. It's like a ruler that we can, once we look at it together and see what it is, we can all say, oh, we want to go to that side of the ruler.
Sure.
Not this side. And so it gives us a direction to go.
And so what are the parts of the ladder?
So I have these two characters. This orange guy, this primitive mind, this is our software. That is the software that was in a 50,000 BC person's head that was specifically optimized to help that person survive in that world. And not really survive, but help them pass their genes on in that world. And civilization happened quickly and brains changed slowly. And so that unchanged dude is still running the show in our head. And I use the example of like Skittles. Like, why do we eat Skittles? It's trash. It's obviously bad for you. And it's because the primitive mind in the world that it was programmed for, there was no Skittles, and it was just fruit. And, and if there was a dense, chewy, sweet fruit like that, it meant you just found like a calorie gold mine. Energy, take it, eat as much as you can, gorge on it. Hopefully you get a little fat. That would be the dream. And now we're so good with energy for a while. We don't have to stress about it anymore. So today, Mars Inc. is clever and says, let's not sell things to people's higher minds, who's the other character. Let's sell to people's primitive minds. Primitive minds are dumb, and let's trick them into thinking this is this thing you should eat, and then they'll eat it. And now Mars Inc. is a huge company.
Actually, just to linger real quick. So you said primitive mind and higher mind. So those are the two things that make up this bigger mind that is the modern human being.
Yeah, it's like, it's not perfect. Obviously, there's a lot of crossover. There's people who will yell at me for saying there's two minds, and but to me, it's still a useful framework where you have this software that has making decisions based on a world that you're not in anymore. And then you've got this other character, I call it the higher mind, and it's the part of you that knows that Skittles are not good and can override the instinct. And the reason you don't always eat Skittles is because the higher mind says, no, we're not doing that because that's bad, and I know that, right? Now, you can apply that to a lot of things. The higher mind is the one that knows I shouldn't procrastinate. The primitive mind is the one that wants to conserve energy and not do anything icky and can't see the future, so he procrastinates. You can apply this. No, I, in this book, apply it to how we form our beliefs is one of the ways, and then eventually to politics and political movements. But like, if you think about what's the equivalent of the Skittles tug of war in your head for how do you form your beliefs? And it's that the primitive mind in the world that it was optimized for, it wanted to feel conviction about its beliefs. It wanted to be sure that it was, it wanted to feel conviction, and it wanted to agree with the people around there. It didn't want to stand out. It wanted to fervently agree with the tribe about the tribe's sacred beliefs, right? And so there's a big part of us that wants to do that doesn't like changing our mind. It feels like it's part of the primitive mind identifies with beliefs. Feels like it's a threat, a physical threat to your primitive mind when you change your mind or when someone disagrees with you in a smart way. So there's that huge force in us, which is confirmation bias. That's where that comes from. It's this desire to keep believing what we believe, and this desire to also fit in with our beliefs, to believe what the people around us believe. And that can be fun in some ways. We all like the same sports team, and we're all super into it, and we're all going to be biased about that call together. I mean, that it's not always bad, but it's not a very smart way to be. And you're working kind of for those ideas. Those ideas are like your boss, and you're working so hard to keep believing those. Those ideas are, a really good paper comes in that you read that conflicts with those ideas, and you will do all this work to say that paper is bullshit because you're a faithful employee of those ideas. Now, the higher mind, to me, the same part of you that can override the Skittles, can override this and can search for something that makes a lot more sense, which is truth. Because what rational being wouldn't want to know the truth? Who wants to be delusional? And so there's this tug of war because the higher mind doesn't identify with ideas. Why would you? It's an experiment you're doing. And it's a mental model. And if someone can come over and say, you're wrong, you'd say, where? Show me. And if they point out something that is wrong, you'd say, oh, thanks. Oh, good. I just got a little smarter, right? You're not going to identify with the thing. Go, yeah, kick it. See if you can break it. If you can break it, it's not that good, right? So there's both of these in our heads. And there's this tug of war between them. And sometimes, if you're telling me about something with AI, I'm probably going to think with my higher mind because I'm not identified with it. But if you go and you criticize the ideas in this book, or you criticize my religious beliefs, or you criticize, I might have a harder time because the primitive mind says, no, those are our special ideas. And so, yeah, so that's one way to use this ladder is like, it's a spectrum. At the top, the higher mind is doing all the thinking. And then as you go down, it becomes more of a tug of war. And at the bottom, the primitive mind is in total control.
And this is distinct, as you show, from the spectrum of ideas. So this is how you think versus what you think. And those are distinct. Those are different dimensions.
We need a vertical axis. We have all these horizontal axes, left, right, center, or, this opinion all the way to this opinion. But it's like, what's much more important than where you stand is how you got there, right? And how you think. So this helps if I can say this person's kind of on the left or on the right, but they're up high. I think in other words, I think they got there using evidence and reason, and they were willing to change their mind. Now that means a lot to me, what they have to say. If I think they're just a tribal person and I can predict all their beliefs from hearing one because it's so obvious what political beliefs, that person's views are irrelevant to me because they're not real. They didn't come from information. They came from a tribe's kind of, sacred 10 commandments.
I really like the comic you have in here about with the boxer. This is the best boxer in the world. Wow, cool. Who has he beaten? No one. He's never fought anyone. Then how do you know he's the best boxer in the world? I can just tell. I mean, this connects with me, and I think with a lot of people, just because in martial arts, it's especially kind of true. There's this whole legend about different martial artists, and that kind of we construct like action figures, like thinking that Steven Seagal is the best fighter in the world, or Chuck Norris. But Chuck Norris is actually backed up. He has done really well in competition, but still, the ultimate test particularly for martial arts is what we now know as mixed martial arts, UFC, and so on. And that's the actual scientific testing ground.
It's a meritocracy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's within certain rules, and you can criticize those rules. Like, this doesn't actually represent the broader combat that you would think of when you're thinking about martial arts. But reality is you're actually testing things. And that's when you realize that Aikido and some of these kind of woo-woo martial arts in their certain implementations don't work in the way you think they would in the context of fighting. And I think this is one of the places where everyone can agree, which is why it's a really nice comic. Because then you start to talk about, map this onto ideas that people take personally. It starts becoming a lot more difficult to basically highlight that we're thinking with, not with our higher mind, but with our primitive mind.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm thinking with my higher mind, and now here is you can use different things for an idea as a metaphor. So here, the metaphor is a boxer.
Yeah.
For one of your conclusions, one of your beliefs, and if all I care about is truth, in other words, that means all I care about is having a good boxer. I would say, go, yeah, try, see if this person's good. Go. In other words, I would get into arguments, which is throwing my boxer out there to fight against other ones. And if I think my argument's good, by the way, I love boxing. If I think my guy is amazing, Mike Tyson, I'm thinking, oh yeah, bring it on. Who wants to come see? I bet no one can beat my boxer. I love a good debate, right? In that case. Now, what would you think about my boxer if not only was I telling you he was great, but he's never boxed anyone, but then you said, okay, well, your idea came over to try to punch him, and I screamed and I said, what are you doing? That's violence, and you're an awful person, and I don't want to be friends with you anymore because you would think this boxer obviously sucks, or at least I think it sucks deep down, because why would I be so anti anyone? No boxing allowed. People. So I think. If you're in, I call this a ladder, right? If you're in low rung land, whether it's a culture or whatever, a debate, an argument, when someone says, no, that's totally wrong, what you're saying about that, and here's why, or you're actually being totally biased, it sounds like a fight. People are going to say, oh, wow, we got in like a fight. It was really awkward. Like, are we still friends with that person? Because that's not a culture of boxing. It's a culture where you don't touch each other's ideas. That's insensitive. Versus in a high rung culture, it's sport. Look at every one of your podcasts. You're whether you're agreeing or disagreeing, the tone is the same. It's not like, oh, this got awkward. It's like the tone is identical because you're just playing intellectually either way because it's a good high wrong space.
At his best. But people do take stuff personally. And then that's actually one of the skills of conversation, just as a fan of podcasts, is when you sense that people take a thing personally, you have to like, there's sort of methodologies and little paths you can take to like calm things down, like go around don't take it as a violation of like
you're trying to suss out which of their ideas are sacred to them, and which ones are bring it on.
And sometimes it's actually, I mean, that's the skill of it, I suppose, that sometimes it's the certain wordings in the way you challenge those ideas are important. You can challenge them indirectly, and then together walk together in that way, because what I've learned is people are used to their ideas being attacked in a certain way, in a certain tribal way. And if you just avoid those, like, for example, if you have political discussions and just never mention left or right or Republican and Democrat, none of that. Just talk about different ideas and avoid certain kind of triggering words. You can actually talk about ideas versus falling into this path that's well established through battles that people have previously fought.
When you say triggering, I mean, who's getting triggered? The primitive mind. So what you're trying to do, what you're saying in this language is, how do you have conversations with other people's higher minds, almost like whispering, without waking up the primitive mind?
Exactly.
The primitive mind is there sleeping, right? And as soon as you say something, the left primitive mind gets up and says, "What? What are you saying about the left?" And now everything goes off the rails.
What do you make of conspiracy theories under this framework of the latter?
So here's the thing about conspiracy theories is that once in a while they're true, right? Because sometimes there's an actual conspiracy. Actually, humans are pretty good at real conspiracies, secret things. And then, I just watched the Madoff doc. Mm-hmm. Great new Netflix doc, by the way. So the question is, how do you create a system that is good at, you put the conspiracy theory in and it either goes or it says, this is interesting, let's keep exploring it. Like, how do you do something that how do you assess? And so again, I think the high rung culture is really good at it, because a real conspiracy, what's going to happen is you put it, it's like a little machine you put in the middle of the table, and everyone starts firing darts at it, or bow and arrow or whatever, and everyone starts kicking it and trying to, and almost all conspiracy theories, they quickly crumble, right? Because they actually, Trump's election one is, I actually dug in and I looked at like every claim that he or his team made, and I was like, all of these none of these hold up to scrutiny. None of them. I was open-minded, but none of them did. So that was one that as soon as it's open to scrutiny, it crumbles. The only way that conspiracy can stick around in a community is if it is a culture where that's being treated as a sacred idea that no one should kick or throw a dart at, because if you throw a dart, it's going to break. So what you want is a culture where no idea is sacred. Anything can get thrown at. And so I think that then what you'll find is that 94 out of 100 conspiracy theories come in and they fall down. The other, maybe 4 of the others come in and there's something there, but it's not as extreme as people say. And then maybe one is a huge deal and it's actually a real conspiracy.
Well, isn't there a lot of gray area and there's a lot of mystery? Isn't that where the conspiracy theories seep in? So it's great to hear that you've really looked into the Trump election fraud claims, but aren't they resting on a lot of kind of gray area, like fog, basically saying that there is dark forces in the shadows that are actually controlling everything? I mean, the same thing with there's like safer conspiracy theories, less controversial ones, like, have we landed on the moon? Right? Did the United States ever land on the moon? There's, like, the reason those conspiracy theories work is you could construct, there's incentives and motivation for faking the moon landing. There's a lot of, there's very little data supporting the moon landing. Like, that's very public and kind of looks fake. Space kind of,
and that would be a big story if it turned out to be fake.
That would be the argument against it. Like, are people really as a collective going to hold on to a story that big? So that, but there's a lot that the reason they work is there's mystery.
Yeah, there's a great documentary called Behind the Curve about flat earthers. And one of the things that you learn about flat earthers is they believe all the conspiracies, not just the flat earth. They're They're convinced the moon landing is fake. They're convinced 9/11 was an American con job. They're convinced, that name a conspiracy and they believe it. And so it's so interesting is that I think of it as a skepticism spectrum.
Yeah.
So on one side, it's like a filter in your head, a filter in the beliefs section of your brain. On one end of the spectrum, you are gullible, perfectly gullible. You believe anything someone says, right? On the other side, you're paranoid. You think everyone's lying to you, right? Everything is false. Nothing that anyone says is true. Right. So obviously those aren't good places to be. Now the healthy place, I think that so I think the healthy place is to be somewhere in the middle. But also you can learn to trust certain sources, and then, you don't have to apply as much skepticism to them. And so here's what, like, when you start having a bias, just say you have a political bias, when your side says something, you will find yourself moving towards the gullible side of the spectrum. You read an article written that supports your views, you move to the gullible side of the spectrum, and you just believe it, and you don't have where's that skepticism that you normally have, right? Mm-hmm. And then you move, and then soon as it's the other person talking, the other team talking, you move to the skeptical, the closer to the in denial, paranoid side. Now, flat earthers are the extreme. They are either at 10 or 1. So it's so interesting because they're the people who are saying, I won't believe you. I'm not gullible. No, everyone else is gullible about the moon landing. I won't. And then yet when there's this evidence like, because you can't see Seattle, you can't see the buildings over that horizon, and you should, which isn't true. Mm-hmm. You should be. If the Earth were round, you wouldn't be able to see them. Therefore, so suddenly they become the most gullible person. They hear any theory about the Earth flat, they believe it. It goes right into their beliefs. Mm-hmm. So they're actually jumping back and forth between refusal to believe anything and believe anything. And so they're the extreme example. But I think when it comes to conspiracy theories, the people that get themselves into trouble are the ones who they become really gullible when they hear a conspiracy theory that kind of fits with their worldview. And they likewise, when there's something that's kind of obviously true and it's not a big lie, they will actually they'll think it is. They just tighten up their kind of skepticism filter. And so yeah. So I think the healthy places to be is where you are not. Because you also don't want to be the person who says every conspiracy. You hear the word conspiracy theory, and it sounds like a synonym for like quack job crazy theory, right? So yeah, so I think it's to be somewhere in the middle of that spectrum and to learn to fine tune it,
which is a tricky place to operate because you kind of have to, every time you hear a new conspiracy theory, you should approach it with an open mind, and and also if you don't have enough time to investigate it, which most people don't, kind of still have a humility not to make a conclusive statement that that's nonsense.
There's a lot of social pressure, actually, to immediately laugh off any conspiracy theory if it's done by the bad guys, right? Mm-hmm. You will quickly get mocked and laughed at and not taken seriously if you give any credence. Back the lab leak was a good one where it's like, turned out that was at least very credible, if not true. And that was a perfect example of one where when it first came out, not only so Brett Weinstein talked about it. And then I, in a totally different conversation, said something complimentary about him on a totally different subject. And people were saying, Tim, you might have gone a little off the deep end. You're like quoting someone who is like a lab leak person. So I was getting my reputation dinged for complimenting on a different topic someone whose reputation was totally sullied because they had, they questioned an orthodoxy. Right. So it's you see, so what does that make me want to do? Distance myself from Brett Weinstein. At least that's the incentive. And what does that make other people want to do? Don't become the next Brett Weinstein. Don't say it out loud because you don't want to become someone that no one wants to compliment anymore. Right. You can see the social pressure. And of course, when there is a conspiracy, that social pressure is its best friend.
Because then they see the people from outside are seeing that social pressure enact like a Tim Urban becoming more and more and more extreme to the other side, and so they're going to take the more and more and more extreme. What do you see that the pandemic did, that COVID did to our civilization in that regard, in the forces? Why was it so divisive? Do you understand that?
Yeah. So COVID, I thought might be, we always, the ultimate example of a topic that will unite us all is the alien attack.
Yeah.
Although honestly, I don't even have that much faith then. I think there'd be like some people are super like, pro-alien and some people are anti-alien. But anyway.
I was actually sorry to interrupt because I was talking to a few astronomers, and they're the first folks, that made me kind of sad. In that, if we discover life on Mars, for example, that there's going to be potentially a division over that too, where half the people will not believe that's real.
Well, because we live in a current society where the political divide has subsumed everything. And that's not always like that. It goes into stages like that. We're in a really bad one where it's, I actually, in the book, I call it like a vortex, like almost like a whirlpool that pulls everything into it. It pulls, and so normally you'd say, okay, immigration, naturally going to be contentious. That's always political, right?
Yeah.
But like COVID seemed like, oh, that's one of those that will unite us all. Let's fight this not human virus thing. Like, obvious is no one's sensitive. No one's like getting hurt when we insult the virus. Like, let's all we have this threat, this common threat that's a threat to everyone of every nationality in every country, every ethnicity. And what it didn't do that at all. The whirlpool was too powerful. So it pulled COVID in, and suddenly masks, if you're on the left, you like them. If you're on the right, you hate them. Mm-hmm. And suddenly lockdowns, if you're on the left, you like them, and on the right, you hate them. And vaccines, people forget this. When Trump first started talking about the vaccine, Biden, Harris, Cuomo, they're all saying, I'm not taking that vaccine, not from this CDC.
Because it was too rushed or something like that?
No, but because I'm not trusting anything that Trump says. Trump wants me to take it, I'm not taking it. Yeah. I'm not taking it from this CDC. So Trump was almost out of office, but at the time, if Trump had been in, it would have been, I'm pretty sure it would have stayed. Right likes vaccines, the left doesn't like vaccines. Instead, the president switched. And all those people are suddenly saying, they were actually specifically saying that if if you're saying the CDC is not trustworthy, that's misinformation, which is exactly what they were saying about the other CDC. And they were saying it because they genuinely didn't trust Trump, which is fair. But now when other people don't trust the Biden CDC, suddenly it's this kind of misinformation that needs to be censored. So it was a sad moment because it was a couple of months at the very, even a week or so, a month or so at the very beginning, when it felt like a lot of our other squabbles were kind of like, oh, I feel like they're kind of irrelevant right now.
Yeah.
And then very quickly the whirlpool sucked it in. And in a way where I think it damaged the reputation of the trust in a lot of these institutions for the long run.
But there's also an individual psychological impact. It's like a vicious negative feedback cycle where they were deeply affected on an emotional level and people just were not their best selves.
That's definitely true. Yeah. I mean, talk about the primitive mind. I mean, one thing that we've been dealing with for our whole human history is pathogens. Yeah. And it's emotional, right? It brings out, there's really interesting studies where like, they study the phenomenon of disgust, which is one of these like, smiling is universal. Mm-hmm. You don't have to ever translate a smile, right? Certain, throwing your hands up when your sports team wins is universal because it's part of our coding. And so is disgust, to kind of make this like, face where you wrinkle up your nose and you kind of put out your tongue and maybe even gag. That's to expel whatever, because it's the reaction when something is potentially a pathogen that might harm us, mm-hmm. right? Feces, vomit, whatever. But they did this interesting study where people who in two groups, the control group, was shown images of, and I might be getting two studies mixed up, but they were showing images of like car crashes and like disturbing but not disgusting, and the other one was showing like rotting things and just things that were disgusting. And then they were asked about immigration. These were Canadians, and the group that had the disgust feeling pulsing through their body was way more likely to prefer like immigrants from white countries. And the group that had been shown car accidents, they still preferred the groups from white countries, but much less so. And so what does that mean? It's because with the disgust impulse makes us scared of, sexual practices that are foreign, of ethnicities that don't look like us, of it's still xenophobia. So it's ugly. It's this really ugly stuff. This is, of course, also how, the Nazi propaganda with cockroaches and or it was the Rwandan was cockroaches, the Nazis was rats, and it's specifically, it's a dehumanizing emotion. So anyway, we were talking about COVID, but I think it taps deep into like the human psyche, and I don't think it brings out our I think it, like you said, I think it brings out an ugly side in us.